Captain Jake Morrison stared at the massive black ship that had just appeared outside his colony vessel. The thing was huge, maybe 10 times bigger than his own ship. It looked like some kind of giant metal beast with sharp edges and glowing red lights. Jake had never seen anything like it in his 20 years of space travel. "Captain, we're getting a message," said Lisa Hayes from her station. She was his communications officer and had been with him since they left Earth 5 years ago. Her voice was tight with worry. "Put it on screen," Jake said. The screen flickered and then showed something that made everyone on the bridge take a step back. The creature standing there was 12 feet tall, with black scales that seemed to drink in the light. Its eyes glowed like red coals, and when it spoke, its voice was like grinding metal. "I am Warcast Vextal of the Zefkari Dominion. You will surrender your vessel immediately, or be destroyed." Jake felt his heart pounding, but he kept his voice steady. "This is Captain Morrison of the colony ship New Horizon. We're peaceful explorers. We don't want any trouble." The alien made a sound that might have been laughter, but felt more like nails on metal. "Trouble? You misunderstand, small creature. We are not here to make trouble. We are here to claim what is ours. This entire sector now belongs to the Zefkari Empire." Behind Jake, Dr. Amy Foster was quietly taking readings with her scanner. She was their science officer, and the smartest person he knew. Amy had studied alien life for most of her career, but had never seen anything like this. "Captain," she whispered, "the ship is broadcasting some kind of low-frequency sound, designed to trigger fear responses in most known species." Jake could feel it now that she mentioned it. There was something about being near these aliens that made his skin crawl and his hands shake, but he noticed something else too. Unlike the complete terror he expected to feel, he could still think clearly. His mind was racing, looking for options, for ways to fight back or escape. "You have one standard cycle to prepare your people," Vextal continued. "When we return, you will be relocated to the mining worlds. Your species will serve the Empire in the extraction of rare minerals. Resistance will result in immediate termination." The screen went black. Jake looked around at his crew. They were all scared. He could see it in their faces. But none of them had collapsed or given up, or still at their stations, still ready to work. "Amy, what do you make of this?" Jake asked. Dr. Foster was studying her readings with intense focus. "Captain, this is fascinating. The fear response they're trying to trigger is working on us, but not the way it should. Most species would be completely paralyzed by now. Scared, yes, but we're still functioning." "What does that mean?" asked Lisa. "I think it means we're different somehow. The way humans evolved, the way our brains work under stress, we don't shut down when we're afraid. We adapt." Jake thought about his grandfathers, stories of the old wars on Earth, how humans had fought against impossible odds and somehow found ways to win. Maybe Amy was right. Maybe being afraid didn't have to mean giving up. "Sir," came a voice from the back of the bridge. It was Carl Bennett, their mining specialist. Been monitoring communications from other human colonies in this sector. They're all getting the same message. The Zefkari are moving on all our settlements at once. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about his ship or even his colony. This was about all of humanity. "How many colonies?" he asked. 17, that I can confirm," Carl replied. "Maybe more. And Captain, I'm picking up old transmissions from deeper in space. Looks like these Zefkari have been doing this for a long time. Hundreds of other species have been conquered." Amy looked up from her scanner. "Captain, I need to tell you something. The way these aliens are built, their psychology, it's all designed around fear. They don't just conquer other species, they break them mentally first. Fear is their primary weapon." "But it's not working on us the same way," Jake said. "No, it's not. We're afraid, but we're angry too, and anger makes humans dangerous." Jake walked over to the main viewing port and looked out at the alien ship. It was definitely scary, all black metal and sharp edges. But as he stared at it, he felt something growing inside him. Not just fear, but determination, these aliens thought. They could just show up and take everything humans had worked for. They thought fear would make humans easy to control. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Lisa, send a message to all human colonies in the sector. Tell them what we've learned about these Zefkari. Tell them we're not going to just roll over and let them take our worlds. What are we going to do, Captain? Asked Carl. Jake turned back to his crew. They were all looking at him, waiting for orders. He could see the fear in their eyes, but he could see something else too. The same determination he felt. It's the same anger at being threatened. We're going to show these aliens something they've never seen before, Jake said. They rule through fear, but they've never met a species that fights back when they're scared. They think fear makes us weak. They're about to find out it makes us stronger. The alien ship hung in space like a dark promise of destruction. But Jake Morrison and his crew were no longer thinking about surrendering. They were thinking about fighting back. The Zefkari had conquered 847 other species with their fear tactics. They had never met humans before. Outside the viewing port, the black ship waited. Inside the New Horizon, humanity was about to begin learning how to turn their greatest weakness into their most powerful weapon. The war for the galaxy was about to begin, and it would be fought on terms the Zefkari had never imagined. Fear was about to become humanity's greatest ally. 6 months had passed since the Zefkar ships first appeared over New Terra. Carl Bennett stood in the main mining facility watching the alien overseers direct human workers with electric prods. The tall, scaled creatures moved between the humans like dark shadows, their red eyes constantly watching for any sign of defiance. Overseer Kurthul was the worst of them. The 12-foot-tall alien seemed to enjoy causing pain. He would shock workers for moving too slowly or talking to each other. Carl had seen him kill 3 humans in the past month just to make examples of them. Move faster, dirt crawler. Kurthul hissed at an older human woman struggling with a heavy container of rare metals. When she stumbled, he raised his shock. Rod. Carl stepped forward without thinking. She's doing her best. The container is too heavy for one person. Kurthul turned his burning red eyes toward Carl. The alien's presence made Carl's skin crawl and his heart race. But he didn't back down. He had learned something important over the past 6 months. Being afraid didn't mean he had to be helpless. You dare question me, mining slave? Kurthul's voice was like grinding metal. Perhaps you need a reminder of your place. The shock. Rod hit Carl in the chest and sent him to his knees. Pain shot through his body like fire, but even as he gasped for breath, his mind was working. He noticed how the alien held the weapon, where the power source was located, how long it took to recharge between shocks. Let this be a lesson, Kurthul announced to the other workers. Fear us, obey us, or join the dead. But as Carl got back to his feet, he saw something in the other workers' faces that the alien had missed. They weren't just afraid anymore. They were angry, and angry humans were dangerous humans. That night, Carl made his way through the service. Tunnels beneath the mining facility. He wasn't alone. Kate Williams, a former military sergeant, was already waiting in the hidden room they had found weeks ago. With her were Ryan Cooper, an engineer who knew every system in the facility, and Megan Torres, who had been a communications specialist before the invasion. The resistance is growing, Kate said quietly. We have cells in 12 different facilities. Now, word is spreading. What about weapons? Ryan asked. Can't fight those things with our bare hands. We don't need to fight them directly, Carl said. We need to be smarter. These aliens have conquered hundreds of worlds by breaking spirits first, but they don't understand humans. When we're scared, we don't just give up. We get creative. Megan nodded. I've been monitoring their communications. They're confused. Every other species they conquered was completely broken within weeks. We're 6 months in and getting stronger. Because fear affects us differently, Kate added. Dr. Foster sent a message through the underground network before they took her to the research facility. She said humans evolved as hunters. Afraid, our brains don't shut down. They focus. They look for ways to fight back. Ryan pulled out a small device he had been working on. Speaking of fighting back, I figured out how to overload their shock rods. One little modification to the power cells in the mining equipment, and boom. Next time one of those monsters tries to shock someone, their weapon explodes in their face. That's good, Carl said, but we need to think bigger. These aliens rule through fear, right? What if we started making them afraid instead? The group looked at him with interest. Kate leaned forward. What do you mean? Mean accidents? Lots of them. Equipment failures that hurt Zefkari but look completely random. Food that makes them sick. Transport systems that break down at just the right moment, make their lives here so miserable and dangerous that they start jumping at shadows. Over the following weeks, the plan began to work. Mining equipment would malfunction at critical moments, sending heavy containers crashing down where aliens had been standing moments before. The facility's environmental systems developed strange glitches that made certain areas too hot or too cold for the Zefkari's comfort. Cthulhu was becoming paranoid. Carl noticed how the overseer's eyes darted around constantly now, how he flinched at unexpected sounds. The alien was still cruel, but there was something new in his behavior. Uncertainty, the breaking point came when the aliens decided to make an example that would crush human resistance once and for all. They brought all the workers to the main plaza and forced them to watch as they executed Ben Clark, the former colony administrator. Ben had been caught trying to smuggle food to families in the residential sector. What made it worse was that Ben's 10-year-old daughter Emma had to watch. The little girl stood there as the aliens killed her father. Tears streaming down her face, but her back straight and proud. Cthulhu stepped forward to address the crowd. This is what happens to those who defy the Empire. Fear us and live. Resist us and die. But instead of the broken spirits the aliens expected to see, they found something else entirely. The humans weren't cowering. They were staring at the aliens with a cold fury that made even the massive Zefkari uncomfortable. Emma Clark walked forward and looked up at Cthulhu. Her voice was small but clear. My daddy said, "You're just bullies. And bullies are always afraid of something. We're going to find out what you're afraid of." That night, the resistance exploded into action. Ryan's modified equipment caused 3 mining robots to malfunction simultaneously, crushing 2 alien guards. Megan's communication hacks spread word of the execution to every human facility on the planet. Kate's military contacts began coordinating strikes across multiple locations. But most importantly, Dr. Amy Foster's research data began spreading through the underground network. Her studies showed that humans had a unique neurological response to extreme fear. Instead of shutting down, their brains released chemicals that enhanced tactical thinking and pain tolerance. The aliens had spent 6 months trying to break human spirits through fear. Instead, they had been training humans to fight while terrified. They had turned their enemies into something they had never encountered before, species that became more dangerous the more afraid they became. Carl stood in the mining facility the next morning, watching Cthulhu nervously inspect every piece of equipment before using it. The alien overseer jumped at every unexpected sound and kept looking over his shoulder. For the first time since the invasion began, Carl smiled. The Zefkari were learning what it meant to be afraid. And fear, as humans had discovered, could be a very powerful weapon when properly used. The resistance was just beginning. 1 year after the invasion, General Alex Stone crouched in the ruins of what used to be Chicago's main spaceport. Zefkari had built their regional command center here. A massive black tower that reached into the sky like a metal claw. But tonight, Alex and his team were going to bring it down. Remember? Alex whispered to his team of 12 resistance fighters. We're not trying to be heroes. We're trying to send a message. The Zefkari think fear makes us weak. We're going to show them it makes us smart. Janet Miller, who had been running sabotage operations in the mining sector, checked her explosives one more time. The charges are set on the support beams, just like we planned. When this thing comes down, every alien in the sector will know we did it. Alex nodded. Over the past year, he had learned something important about fighting the Zefkari. They expected their enemies to either cower in fear or charge at them in blind rage. They didn't expect careful planning mixed with controlled terror. Came a whisper from Diana Ross, their communications specialist. She had been monitoring alien transmissions from her hidden position. I'm picking up chatter from 3 other worlds. The same thing is happening everywhere. Human resistance is growing stronger, not weaker. Alex smiled in the darkness. That was the best news he had heard all month. When the Zefkari first invaded, they had scattered human populations across different worlds to prevent organized resistance. What they didn't understand was that humans were very good at finding each other and working together, even when they were afraid. "What are the other worlds reporting?" he asked. "New Dallas says they've destroyed 4 alien supply depots this month. New York Colony has taken out an entire patrol fleet. And get this, sir. The aliens are starting to request reinforcements. They've never had to do that before." That made Alex pause. In all their research on the Zefkari Empire, they had never found records of the aliens needing extra troops to hold a conquered world. Usually, one occupation force was enough to keep an entire species under control for generations. Came another voice. It was Bobby Jackson, a former sheriff who had become one of their best scouts. "We've got movement in the tower. Looks like they're doubling the guard shifts." Alex studied the tower through his binoculars. The Zefkari guards were clearly nervous. They kept looking around as if expecting attacks from every shadow. Posture was different too. Instead of the confident swagger they had shown a year ago, they moved like soldiers in enemy territory. "They're scared," Alex realized. "Look at them. They're actually scared of us." It was a strange feeling. For most of his life, Alex had been the one feeling fear. During the invasion, when he watched his unit get cut down by alien weapons, during the early days of occupation, when every human lived in terror of being selected for execution, but now seeing those 12-foot-tall monsters jumping at shadows, Alex understood something Dr. Foster had been trying to tell them. Fear wasn't just something that happened to you. It was something you could give to others. "A new plan," he said. To his team, "We're not just blowing up the tower. We're going to make sure they know we could have killed every one of them inside, but chose not to." Janet looked confused. "Sir, why would we let them live?" "Because dead aliens can't be afraid." "Living aliens who know they should be dead, who know we had them completely at our mercy and chose to spare them, those aliens will never feel safe again." The team moved through the maintenance tunnels beneath the tower. Nancy Wilson, their tech specialist, had spent weeks mapping every system in the building. She knew exactly where to place the charges for maximum psychological impact with minimum casualties. "Remember," Alex said as they reached their positions, "we want them to know." This was planned. "We want them to realize we could have done this any time we wanted. We want them to understand that they're only alive because we decided to let them live."
Oh.
The explosion started at exactly midnight, not the random destruction of desperate rebels, but carefully timed charges that brought down specific sections of the tower in a precise sequence. The main structure collapsed in on itself, while the emergency shelters remained intact. Every alien in the building survived, but they all knew they should have died. As the dust settled, Alex's team melted back into the city. They left behind something more valuable than destroyed buildings. They left behind the seeds of doubt in alien minds that had never experienced uncertainty before. 3 days later, Diana intercepted a transmission that made the entire resistance network celebrate. The Zefkar regional commander was requesting permission to negotiate with the human resistance leaders. "They want to talk," Diana announced to the gathered resistance cell leaders. For the first time in 300 years of conquest, the Zefkari Empire wants to negotiate instead of simply destroying. Dr. Amy Foster, who had been freed in a raid on the research facility, studied the transmission data. "This is unprecedented. In all their records, the Zefkari have never acknowledged a resistance movement as a legitimate threat. They've always just crushed opposition with overwhelming force."
Oh.
"So why are they different with us?" asked Kate Williams.
Amy smiled. "Because we're the first species they've encountered that gets more dangerous when we're afraid, not less. Other species they conquered became easier to control over time. We become harder to control. We adapt. We learn. We turn our fear into a weapon." Alex looked around at the faces of his fellow resistance fighters. A year ago, they had been ordinary. People living ordinary lives. Miners, engineers, teachers, farmers. The Zefkari invasion had filled them with terror, but instead of breaking them, that terror had forged them into something new. "So what do we tell them?" Janet asked. "Do we negotiate?" Alex thought about Emma Clark, the little girl who had watched her father die and promised to find out what the aliens were afraid of. He thought about all the humans who had died in the past year and all the ones who were still fighting across the galaxy. "We tell them the truth," he said. "We tell them that humans don't negotiate with bullies. We tell them that fear works both ways. And we tell them that they have exactly one choice: leave our worlds or find out just how creative scared humans can get."
Outside the ruined tower, Zefkari patrols moved through the streets with weapons ready and eyes constantly watching the
shadows. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's apex predators were learning what it felt like to be prey. The human resistance had found their strength in their greatest weakness.
It was time to show the galaxy what that strength could
accomplish. 18 months after the first invasion, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the captured Zefkari ship he had renamed Freedom's Edge. The alien vessel had been completely rebuilt by Nancy Wilson and her engineering team. It had been designed to inspire fear. Now it served as a symbol of human defiance. "Captain," came the voice of Tyler Adams from the communications station. "We're getting reports from all over the sector. The Zefkari are bringing in their dread ships." Jake felt his blood run cold. Everyone in the Resistance had heard stories about the dread ships. They were the Zefkari's ultimate weapon. Massive vessels that could broadcast pure terror directly into the minds of their enemies. Entire civilizations had surrendered without a fight when these ships appeared in their skies. "How many?" Jake asked. "7 confirmed, sir. Maybe more on the way. The flagship is called Nightmare's End. It's heading straight for New Dallas." New Dallas was where Sheriff Bobby Jackson had been running the most successful resistance operations. If the Zefkari were sending their terror ships there, it meant they were getting desperate. "Nancy, how long until we can reach New Dallas?" Jake called to his chief engineer. 3 hours if we push the engines to maximum," she replied. "But sir, we can't fight a dread ship with conventional weapons. Those things are designed to break minds, not just ships." Jake nodded. He knew Nancy was right. But over the past months, he had learned something important about fighting the Zefkari. You didn't beat them by matching their strength. You beat them by changing the rules of the game. "Tyler, send a message to all resistance cells. Tell them what we learned about fear. Tell them that terror is just another weapon, and weapons can be turned against their users." Meanwhile, on New Dallas, Bobby Jackson watched the massive black ship descend through the atmosphere. The thing was huge, at least 5 miles long, shaped like some kind of nightmare creature with glowing red eyes and sharp metal teeth. Just looking at it made his hands shake and his heart race. But Bobby had learned something over the past year and a half. Being afraid didn't mean being helpless. It meant being focused. "All units, this is Sheriff Jackson," he said into his radio. "The big, scary ship is here. Remember what Dr. Foster taught us? Fear is just chemicals in our brains. We can use those chemicals to make us stronger, faster, smarter. Don't fight the fear. Use it." The dread ship began its terror broadcast. Waves of pure horror washed over the human settlement. It was worse than anything the Zefkari had tried before. This wasn't just scary sounds or threatening images. This was fear itself, pumped directly into human minds. Most species would have collapsed immediately. Their populations would have curled up in corners, unable to move or think. But humans were different. As the terror waves hit them, something unexpected happened. They got angry. Bobby felt the fear hit him like a physical blow. His vision blurred, his muscles tensed, and every instinct told him to run and hide. But instead of running, he grabbed his weapon and started moving toward the Zefkari ground forces that were landing outside the city. All across New Dallas, the same thing was happening. The more terrified the humans became, the more dangerous they got. Fear was supposed to paralyze them, but instead it was making them think faster, move quicker, and fight harder. Dr. Amy Foster, who had been studying this phenomenon for months, watched from her hidden laboratory as the human resistance fighters adapted to the dread ship's attacks in real time. Her instruments showed something that should have been impossible. The terror broadcast was actually making the humans more effective fighters. "This is incredible," she whispered to her assistant, Kevin Barnes. "Look at these readings." The fear. The response is triggering massive releases of adrenaline and other combat chemicals. But instead of causing panic, it's enhancing tactical thinking. Kevin, who had been working on what he called fear bombs for months, grinned. "Doc, I think it's time to test my new toys." His fear bombs weren't designed to kill Zefkari, they were designed to terrify them. Kevin had studied alien psychology and created devices that would trigger the same kind of primal fear in the Zefkari that their ships tried to create in other species. The first bomb went off near the dread ship's landing site. Instead of an explosion, it released a cloud of chemicals that smelled like the natural predators that had hunted the Zefkari on their home world millions of years ago. It also broadcast sounds that triggered deep genetic memories of being prey. The effect on the Zefkari, ground troops, was immediate. These 12-foot-tall monsters, who had terrorized hundreds of worlds, suddenly found themselves experiencing the same helpless terror they had inflicted on others. But the humans weren't done. Tyler Adams had been working on psychological warfare for months, and he had learned something important about the Zefkari. They had built their entire society around the idea that they were the ultimate predators. Take that away, and their whole world collapsed. His broadcasts began appearing on every Zefkari communication channel. Not threats of violence, but something much worse. Stories. Stories of human resistance. Stories of Zefkari defeats. Stories that spread doubt and fear through the alien ranks. "Attention Zefkari forces," Tyler's voice echoed through there. "Ships, you came here to make us afraid. But fear is a two-way street. You've spent so long being the hunters that you've forgotten what it's like to be hunted. We're about to remind you." Jake Morrison's ship arrived just as the battle was reaching its peak. But instead of firing weapons at the dread ship, he did something that no one expected. He opened a communication channel to the alien flagship. "This is Captain Morrison of the Human Resistance Fleet," he said calmly. "I want to make you a deal." Response came quickly. The alien commander's voice filled with rage and confusion. "You dare negotiate with the Zefkari Empire? We will crush you all." "No," Jake replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "You won't, because we've figured out your secret. You're not apex predators. You're just bullies who got lucky, and we're about to prove it to the entire galaxy." On the surface of New Dallas, Bobby Jackson and his resistance fighters had done the impossible. They had not only survived the dread ship's terror attack, they had turned it into a weapon against their enemies. The Zefkari ground forces were in full retreat, their own fear making them clumsy and desperate, for the first time in 3 centuries. A dread ship had failed to break the spirit of its targets. Instead, it had revealed the Zefkari's greatest weakness. They had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten how to fight an enemy that refused to be afraid. The galaxy was about to change forever. 2 years after the invasion began, Supreme Commander Vexkari stood in the command center of the Zefkari homeworld, staring at reports that made no sense. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Empire was losing territory. Not to superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but to something they had never encountered before: fear. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, "we've lost contact with 7 more systems. The human resistance has spread to 43 different worlds, and they're teaching other species their fighting methods." The Xkari's red eyes burned with frustration. How could a species they had icily conquered 2 years ago be causing the collapse of his empire? The humans should have been broken within weeks, just like every other species. "What news from the Dread Fleet?" he asked. The aide's scales darkened. "With shame, the flagship Nightmare's End has requested immediate evacuation from human space. Commander Vextall reports that his terror protocols are somehow making the humans more dangerous, not less." Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the human fleet's flagship, Terra's Revenge. Around him, dozens of ships filled space, some captured from the Zefkari, others built in secret factories on human worlds. But the most important weapons in his fleet weren't guns or missiles. They were ideas. "Samantha, are you ready for the final broadcast?" Jake asked Samantha Lee, their psychological warfare specialist, nodded from her station. She had spent months studying Zefkari psychology, learning their fears and weaknesses. Now she was ready to use that knowledge. "Captain, I've got communication links to every major world in the Zefkari Empire. When we send this message, every species they've conquered will hear it." Jake looked around at his bridge crew. Nancy Wilson at engineering, Tyler Adams at communications, Dr. Amy Foster at the science station. 2 years ago, they had been ordinary people living quiet lives. The Zefkari invasion had filled them with terror, but instead of breaking them, that terror had made them into something new, something dangerous. "Send the message," Jake ordered. Samantha's voice echoed across the galaxy on every communication channel the Zefkari used. But she wasn't speaking to the aliens. She was speaking to their slaves. "This message is for every species under Zefkar control. My name is Samantha Lee, and I represent the human resistance. 2 years ago, the Zefkari invaded our worlds, using the same tactics they used on you. They tried to break our spirits with fear. On hundreds of worlds, in thousands of languages, conquered species listened to words they had never heard before. They told us that fear made us weak. They were wrong. Fear makes us human, and humans don't stay down when they're knocked down. We get back up and we get angry. In the depths of alien mining colonies, in the crowded slave quarters of conquered worlds, something began to stir. Hope. The Zefkari want you to believe they're unstoppable. They want you to think that resistance is impossible. But we've proven them wrong. Every day, on every world, the Empire is losing ground to species who refuse to stay afraid. On the Zefkari, homeworld Dexkari watched in horror as reports flooded in from across his empire. Rebellions were breaking out everywhere. Species that had been conquered for decades were suddenly fighting back with tactics they had learned from humans. "Sir," his communications officer reported, his voice shaking, "we're getting surrender requests from 17 different sectors. Our own commanders are asking permission to negotiate with rebel forces." Dexkari felt something he had never experienced before. It's the same cold terror that his species had used to conquer the galaxy. His empire, built on fear, was crumbling because someone had taught their victims that fear could be fought. Back on Terra's Revenge, Tony Rodriguez was coordinating with resistance leaders across the galaxy. The former field commander had become something more. He was teaching other species the most valuable lesson humans had learned. "Fear is just information," he explained to a group of alien rebels via hologram. "It tells you something is dangerous. But dangerous doesn't mean impossible. Humans have been fighting dangerous things since we lived in caves. That's what makes us human." The final assault on the Zefkari homeworld wasn't a battle in the traditional sense.
Ow.
Jake Morrison's fleet didn't come with massive guns blazing. Instead, they came with something much more terrifying to the aliens. They came with proof that the Zefkari could be defeated. As the human ships approached the alien capital, they were joined by vessels from dozens of other species. The galaxy's former victims had become its liberators, all following tactics they had learned from humans. "This is Captain Morrison to Supreme Commander Thexkari," Jake said, as his fleet surrounded the Zefkari homeworld. "We're here to discuss the terms of your surrender." The response came quickly. The alien leader's voice filled with something his species hadn't felt in centuries. "Desperation. You cannot do this. We are the Zefkari. We're the apex predators of this galaxy." Now came a new voice on the communication channel. It was Emma Clark, now 14 years old, and serving as a junior officer on the Resistance flagship. "You're just bullies. And we found out what you're afraid of." "What?" Dexkari demanded. "Us," Emma replied simply. "You're afraid of anyone who fights back? Afraid of species that don't break when you hurt them? You're afraid of losing the only thing that made you feel powerful?" The surrender negotiations took place on a neutral space station. Rachel Stone, General Alexstone's sister, led the human delegation. Across from her sat the Xkari and the surviving Zefkari leadership, their massive forms somehow seeming smaller than before. "These are our terms," Rachel said calmly. "All occupied worlds will be evacuated immediately. All enslaved species will be freed. The Zefkari Empire will be dissolved, and your species will be relocated to designated worlds where you can live peacefully. And if we refuse," Xkari asked. Rachel smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then we let every species in the galaxy know exactly where to find you. And we teach them everything we learned about fighting when you're scared." 6 months later, the Galactic Liberation Council held its first meeting. Representatives from hundreds of formerly enslaved species gathered to create a new government based on cooperation rather than conquest. Emma Clark, now recognized as the youngest council member in galactic history, stood to address the assembly. "My father died because bullies thought fear made people weak. Today, we've proven that fear can make people strong. Strong enough to fight back, strong enough to win, strong enough to make sure this never happens again." In a small farming community on a former Zefkari world, Vextel tended a garden alongside Carl Bennett. The former war caste commander had learned to find peace in growing things instead of destroying them. His massive claws, once used to terrorize entire populations, now gently planted seeds in rich soil. "Do you ever miss it?" Carl asked as they worked. "The power, the fear?" Vextel considered the question carefully. "I thought power came from making others afraid. You humans taught me something different. Real power comes from helping others overcome their fear." As the twin suns set over the peaceful farming world, former enemies worked side by side, tending gardens that would feed both their families. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Fear could be a weapon, but hope was stronger, and humans, as it turned out, were very good at spreading hope. The age of terror was over, as the age of courage had begun.